Now I'll tell you the story of a Noah tin can found under the stairs of an abandoned lighthouse. Inside was a letter from the missing keeper and a photo of a boy with adult eyes and a hospital bracelet on his wrist. This story still sparks heated debates among eugenics historians and supernatural researchers. Was Samuel a victim of the system or something more? If you're ready, get comfortable. We're starting. The photograph in the Noah tin, 1912. The tin did not belong in the lighthouse. It was too new-looking for the place, galvanized steel with a lid that sealed tight, the kind a government clerk would trust with documents, not the kind a keeper would leave beside a rusted kerosene can. Yet there it was, half swallowed by sand and seagrass beneath the back stair of Cape Disappointment Light, hidden where the wind had piled the dunes up against the stone. When they found it, they were not looking for mystery. They were looking for a body. The gale that struck the mouth of the Columbia River on the last Tuesday of October had ripped shingles from Astoria and snapped pilings along the docks. Men had drowned within sight of shore, tossed from fishing dories, dragged under by ropes, caught where the river met the Pacific in its ugly, shifting bar. There were always stories after storms at the Columbia Bar. This one had more than most, because the keeper was missing. Henry Caldwell had been the assistant keeper at Cape Disappointment for nearly 8 years. He was not a romantic figure to the men who worked the river, not some lone guardian of a noble light. He was simply a reliable man, thin, deliberate, careful with his hands, who kept the lamp trimmed and the lens clean and the clockwork wound. He attended church in Ilwaco when weather allowed, sat with the other keepers in the life-saving service station on winter evenings, and drank coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. On Wednesday morning, after the storm, the head keeper found the lantern room unlocked and the oil room door ajar. He found no Henry. The head keeper, a man named Bishop, reported it to the life-saving service, because that was what men did when something went wrong at the coast. The service sent 2 surfmen up the hill with a lantern and a coil of line. They searched the paths and the cliffs. They searched the beach at low tide, walking among drift logs as long as railroad cars. They found a cap, wool, gray, torn at the brim, wedged in a tangle of kelp. It might have been Henry's. It might have been anyone's. By Friday, a coroner in Pacific County had been notified, though no one said murder out loud. The sea took men. The sea returned them when it wished. Sometimes it did not return them at all. By Sunday, the head keeper sat in the station house in Ilwaco and wrote the report with a hand that trembled at the end of each line. The superintendent would want a clean narrative. Storm, negligence, accident, disappearance. The government preferred its tragedies neat, but there was a problem with neat. On the kitchen table at the lighthouse, beneath a chipped enamel pot, there was a letter. The head keeper had found it folded twice and weighed down by a brass key. It was addressed to Miss E. Hart, Portland, Oregon. No street, no building, no proper flourish. Just a name that could have belonged to 100 women in a city full of boarding houses. And on the inside, in Henry's careful hand, were 2 sentences that refused to settle into any official explanation. If anything happens to me, do not let them send him back. Tell her the photograph is proof. The head keeper, being a practical man, did not like sentences that sounded like the beginning of a newspaper serial. He did not know who him was. He did not know who her was. He only knew that Henry had never spoken of a child. And he knew Henry had been missing for 5 days. So the letter was sent to Portland, not through the ordinary mail, not in the hands of some sleepy clerk who might misplace it. It went by the superintendent's instructions, sealed and stamped and carried by a rail agent who owed favors to the life-saving service. It arrived at the Portland General Post Office on a Monday afternoon and was delivered to a small downtown office that smelled of dust, paste, and old paper. It arrived, by chance more than intent, in the hands of Edith Hart. Edith was 27, a woman too young to have the calm eyes people expected from an archivist and too stubborn to be anyone else. She worked for the Oregon Historical Society as a cataloger, an unglamorous position that involved sorting donations from widows and bankers, labeling photographs, writing to rural counties for missing dates, and gently correcting men who insisted their grandfather's rifle had been carried at Gettysburg, when it was plainly stamped with a later year. Her office had a tall window that looked onto the streetcar tracks and a small desk that wobbled when she leaned on it. On the wall, she kept a map of Oregon with pins in it, places where families had sent letters, diaries, trunks, and the occasional box of bones someone had convinced themselves belonged to an important pioneer. On Monday, she was sorting a donation of glass plate negatives when the messenger arrived. He handed her the envelope with the government seal. She read the name on the outside, Miss E. Hart, and felt the oddest sensation, as if someone had reached through the paper and touched her wrist. She did not know any Henry Caldwell. She did not know any lighthouse keeper. But she did know the handwriting on the inside the moment she unfolded it. She had seen it before, once, in a file that was not hers to open and a story she had not been supposed to read. She locked her door before she read it a second time. Then she read it a third. If anything happens to me, do not let them send him back. Send who back? And proof. Proof of what? The letter was not the only thing in the envelope. At the bottom was a smaller packet, wrapped in waxed paper. It was heavy for its size. It made a faint metal sound when she set it on the desk. Edith peeled the paper away and found the tin. A government tin, the kind used for field notes by surveyors, sometimes by men in the Weather Bureau, sometimes by engineers who did not trust leather in damp places. The lid had been crimped down and sealed with 2 strips of cloth tape. On the tape, written in black ink, were 3 words: "Do not open." Edith stared at it for a long time. She had learned in the quiet way women learned in offices run by men, that warnings were often invitations. She also knew that if a federal superintendent had wanted it unopened, it would not have been sent to her. She took a thin blade from her desk drawer and slipped it beneath the tape. The lid came off with a soft sigh, like a jar giving up its seal. Inside were 2 items. The first was a folded sheet of paper, lined, water-stained, the ink in places blurred but still readable. The second was a photograph, not a studio portrait, not the stiff kind with painted backdrops and careful lighting. This was a snapshot, grainy, slightly off-center, the horizon slanting as if the photographer had been in a hurry. A woman stood in front of a building that could have been a farmhouse or a station house. She wore a simple dress and her hair was pinned up. Her arms were around a boy. The boy's face was turned slightly toward the camera, and something about it made Edith's throat tighten. It was not the boy's eyes, though they were strange. Too steady, too direct, as if he was not looking at the photographer, but through him. It was not the way his mouth sat, neither smiling nor frowning, simply arranged in an expression that belonged on an adult who had learned not to show fear. It was his hand. His left wrist, visible beneath the cuff, carried a white band. Not jewelry, not cloth, a hospital band. Edith leaned closer until her nose nearly touched the paper. The band had writing on it, tiny dark strokes. She could not make out the letters, but she could see the shape of the form, the printed portion, the blank filled in by hand, the kind used in institutions to mark patients so they would not be confused. Edith's hands began to shake, because if this photograph was truly from the coast, if the woman was someone connected to the lighthouse, then why would there be a hospital band on a child? And if it was not from the coast, then why had Henry Caldwell sealed it in a government tin and hidden it under a lighthouse stair? She unfolded the second paper. The ink was blurred by water, but the message was clear enough. Miss Hart, I do not know if you will remember me. You met me at the Society when you were cataloging the Burton donation last spring. I brought you a box of logs from the station, and you showed me how to label them so they would not be thrown away. This is not station business, but I am out of options. The boy's name is Samuel. That is the name I have used. It is not the name they have for him. They will come for him soon. They will say he belongs to the state. They will say he is feeble-minded and cannot be placed. They will say the institution is the only way. It is a lie. He is not what they say. He is older. I cannot explain it in writing. If I am taken, or if the sea takes me, please take this tin and go to Portland Harbor Hospital. Ask for Dr. W.H. Sutherland. Tell him I sent you. Show him the photograph. He will know what it means. If he refuses you, go to the courthouse in Astoria and ask for the file marked SA. The clerk will deny it exists. Do not leave. Do not let them send him back. H.C. Edith read the letter twice and then sat very still, listening to the faint rattle of the streetcar outside. Portland Harbor Hospital was real. It sat near the waterfront, a place where men with crushed fingers and ruptured bellies were brought off ships, a place that smelled of carbolic and wet wool. Dr. William H. Sutherland was real as well. She knew the name because he had donated medical pamphlets to the society, the kind printed for nurses and public lectures. But the courthouse in Astoria and a file marked S.A. That was something else. In 1912, Oregon did not lack for secrets. The progressive era was full of committees and reforms and laws meant to clean up what people had grown used to ignoring. There were new words in the newspapers: dependency, delinquency, feeble-mindedness, eugenics. They were words spoken with confidence by men who believed they could sort human lives like cards. Edith had seen the edge of it in the records. Girls sent away to training schools, boys shipped east on orphan trains, immigrants labeled unfit at ports. Papers could turn a person into a problem, and then the problem could be moved out of sight. She looked again at the photograph. The woman holding the boy had tenderness in her face, genuine tenderness. Her cheek pressed to his hair, her arms firm as if she did not intend to let him be taken. She looked like a sister or a mother or a woman in love with a child she had not birthed, but had claimed anyway. The boy did not lean into her. He stood as if he was being held for the sake of the picture, not for comfort. His gaze was fixed and patient, as if he was enduring something. Edith turned the photograph over. On the back, in pencil, were 2 lines. Cape Disappointment Station, Septa 16, 1912. He said the sea would come early. Edith's blood seemed to cool. The storm had come in late October. Early for the season. He said the sea would come early. A childish lucky guess could be dismissed. A sailor's instinct could be credited. But the phrasing, he said, implied someone listened. It implied someone believed enough to write it down. Edith placed the photograph on her desk, aligned it with the edge as if order could control what it contained. Her mind began to work the way it always did with artifacts, not as fantasies but as connections. Henry Caldwell had met her last spring. He remembered her name, her office, her occupation. That meant he had chosen her, not at random. He had trusted her to preserve things. He had, according to the headkeeper's report, attached to the envelope, disappeared during a storm. He had written of a boy named Samuel, a boy the state would claim. He had referenced a doctor at Harbor Hospital. He had referenced a file in Astoria that a clerk would deny. And he had sealed proof. Proof of what? In a tin and hidden it, in a place where only someone looking carefully would find it. Edith did not believe in ghosts, but she believed in patterns. And this pattern suggested, with a kind of dreadful inevitability, that Henry Caldwell had not merely been taken by the sea. He had been afraid of something on land. She stood and went to the society's main room, where the air smelled of varnished wood and old cloth. Mr. Ladd, the director, sat at his desk reading correspondence with a pair of spectacles perched low on his nose. He was a man who praised women for their tidiness, and then forgot to pay them on time. Edith cleared her throat. "Mr. Ladd," she said in Russian-accented English that she had spent a decade sanding down in Oregon classrooms. She could make it sound American when she wished, but not today. Today, the old edges returned. "I need 2 days' leave." He looked up, frowning. 2 days. For what purpose? "A matter of work," Edith said. She did not lie. She simply did not clarify. "Related to a donation." He reached for his pen. "You can't take society materials out of the building without—" "I'm not taking society materials," she said. She held his gaze. She had learned that most men expected women to look down. She did not. He hesitated, annoyed, then waved his hand as if shooing a fly. "Fine, 2 days, but be back Wednesday. We have the Whitcomb collection arriving." Edith nodded and returned to her office. She packed quickly. The letter, the tin, the photograph wrapped in paper. She added a notebook, 2 pencils, and a small magnifying glass. Then she went down to the street and boarded a streetcar toward the waterfront. If Henry Caldwell had asked her to go to Harbor Hospital, she would go. Not because she was brave, because she had learned in her work with the past that the people who left evidence rarely did so by accident. If a man like Henry had risked his position, his reputation, perhaps his life, to hide a tin beneath a lighthouse stair, then the contents were not a mere curiosity. They were a warning. At the hospital, the clerk at the front desk was a young man with slick hair and a bored expression. Edith asked for Dr. Sutherland. The clerk told her the doctor was in surgery. Edith sat on a wooden bench in the corridor and waited. She watched orderlies push a gurney past her with a man whose face was wrapped in bandages. She watched a nurse in a stiff white cap wash her hands in a basin and then wipe them on a towel that smelled faintly of bleach. She listened to the sound of coughing behind doors. Time moved strangely in hospitals, as if the building itself resisted the outside world. After nearly an hour, a man in a dark suit approached her. He was not wearing a doctor's coat. He was too clean, too careful, his hair parted sharply. He looked like someone who dealt in paperwork and decisions. "Miss Hart?" he asked. Edith rose. "Yes." "I'm Mr. Givens," he said. "Administrator. Dr. Sutherland is not available." Edith felt the hair on her arms lift slightly. "I was told to see him." "By whom?" She could have said, "Henry Caldwell." But something in Mr. Givens's eyes suggested that names were dangerous here. "By a man connected to the coast," she said carefully. "I have something for the doctor." Mr. Givens looked her up and down, taking in her plain coat, her ink-stained fingers, the satchel at her side. He smiled thinly. "If you have a donation for our charitable work, you may leave it with the clerk," he said. "It's not a donation," Edith replied. "It concerns a child." That word changed the air between them. Mr. Givens's smile did not disappear, but it hardened. "We see many children," he said. "Portland is a city. There are accidents, there are diseases, there are pious families who cannot manage." Edith tightened her grip on the satchel strap. "This child has a band," she said, and then, before she could reconsider, she added, "And he may be in danger." Mr. Givens's gaze flicked to the satchel. "What band?" Edith did not answer. Instead, she took the photograph from her satchel and held it up. Only for a moment, just long enough for his eyes to catch the image. She watched his pupils narrow. She watched, unmistakably, recognition. Mr. Givens reached out as if to take it, but Edith pulled it back. "I need to speak to Dr. Sutherland," she said. Mr. Givens's voice lowered. "You do not understand what you are holding." "I understand enough," Edith said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. "It is proof, and I have a letter." Mr. Givens exhaled through his nose. a controlled breath. "Come with me." He led her down a corridor away from the waiting room, past doors marked private and staff only, to a small office with a window that looked onto an alley. The room smelled of tobacco and disinfectant. A ledger sat open on the desk. Mr. Givens gestured for her to sit. Edith remained standing. "You said you had a letter," he said. Edith removed Henry's letter from the tin and placed it on the desk, keeping her hand on it. She did not let it go. Mr. Givens read quickly. His eyes moved like a man accustomed to scanning contracts. When he reached the lines about the state and the institution, his jaw tightened. "Where is Caldwell?" he asked. Edith met his gaze. "Missing. Presumed drowned." Mr. Givens closed his eyes briefly, as if weighing an inconvenience. Then he opened them again. "This is not your concern," he said. "You work for a historical society. You file papers. That is honorable work. But it is not the same as..." "As what?" Edith asked. "As making decisions that protect the public," he said. Edith's skin prickled at the phrase. She had heard men say, "protect the public," when they meant, "remove the inconvenient." "The boy is not dangerous," she said, though she did not know if it was true. Henry had written he was older. That could mean clever. It could mean troubled. It could mean something Edith did not yet understand. But dangerous was a word used to justify cages. Mr. Givens leaned forward. "The boy is..." He stopped, choosing his words. "The boy is a ward case. His disposition is not suitable for placement." "You mean he doesn't fit?" Edith said. Mr. Givens's eyes flashed. "I mean there are proper channels. There are boards. There are physicians. There are laws. And yet, Henry Caldwell hid this," Edith said, tapping the tin lightly with her finger. "Because he was afraid of those channels." For a moment, Mr. Givens said nothing. Then he stood and walked to the door. He opened it slightly and spoke to someone in the corridor, too low for Edith to hear. When he closed it, his face had settled into a polite mask. "Dr. Sutherland can see you," he said. "Briefly." He did not say when. He did not say where. But he moved, and Edith followed, because she understood instinctively that refusing now would mean being escorted out and having the photograph taken from her by force. They walked down another corridor and up a stairwell that smelled of damp stone. At the top was a door with frosted glass. W.H. Sutherland, M.D. Inside, a man sat at a desk under a gas lamp. He was older than Edith expected, perhaps in his 50s, with gray at his temples and a tired crease between his brows. He wore a shirt with rolled sleeves and ink stains on his cuff, as if he had been writing for hours. He looked up as they entered. His eyes went first to Mr. Givens, then to Edith, then to the tin in her hands. "Miss Hart," Dr. Sutherland said quietly. It was not a question. He knew her name. Edith's mouth went dry. "Doctor," she said, "I came because..." "I know why you came," he interrupted gently, and his voice held something Edith had not expected from a man with an administrator hovering behind him. "Regret." Mr. Givens cleared his throat. "Doctor, I have duties." "Then attend them," Dr. Sutherland said, and there was steel under the fatigue. Mr. Givens hesitated, then left the office, closing the door softly behind him. Dr. Sutherland waited a beat, as if listening to ensure the man was truly gone. Then he rose and came around the desk. "Show me," he said. Edith placed the tin on the desk and removed the photograph. Dr. Sutherland took it with hands that did not shake, but his face changed as he looked. Not fear, not disgust, a kind of sorrow edged with alarm. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "A lighthouse," Edith said. "Cape Disappointment. It was hidden." Dr. Sutherland's gaze sharpened. "Then Caldwell is..." "Missing," Edith said. "Presumed drowned." Dr. Sutherland closed his eyes. When he opened them, He seemed older. "He shouldn't have involved you," the doctor murmured. "He chose to," Edith replied. "He said the photograph is proof." "Proof of what?" Dr. Sutherland held the photograph up to the lamp, studying the hospital band. He reached for Edith's magnifying glass without asking and examined the writing. His lips moved silently as he read. Then he set the glass down carefully, as if it might break under the weight of what he knew. "This band," he said, "is from Fairview." Edith had heard of Fairview, though the name sat in the public mind like a stone. The State Institution for the Feeble-Minded had opened in Salem only a few years earlier. Newspapers praised it as modern and humane. People whispered about it as a place children did not return from unchanged. "Fairview is in Salem," Edith said. Dr. Sutherland nodded once. "It is not supposed to send children to the coast." "Then why is this boy there?" Edith asked. "And why is he with Henry Caldwell?" Sutherland's gaze moved to Edith's face, and something like apology flickered there. "Because someone made a mistake," he said, "or because someone made a decision." Edith felt her stomach tighten. "Who is he?" she asked. Dr. Sutherland looked down at the photograph again, at the boy's eyes that did not belong to any ordinary child, in any ordinary picture. "I don't know his proper name," he admitted. "Not for certain. I know what is written in a file I was not meant to see." He paused. "And I know this," he added softly. "If the state learns you have this, they will not ask politely." Edith's pulse quickened. "Then we must act," she said. Dr. Sutherland watched her for a moment, as if measuring what kind of woman she was, whether she would fold, whether she would panic, whether she would obey. "You are sure you want to be involved?" he asked. Edith thought of Henry Caldwell on a cliff in a storm, hiding a tin while the wind screamed and the sea threw itself against stone. She thought of the woman in the photograph holding the boy, as if the world might take him away. "Yes," she said. Dr. Sutherland nodded once. "Then you will need to travel," he said. "To Astoria?" Edith asked. "To Salem," he replied. "And perhaps farther." He reached into a drawer and produced a small card with an address written on it in his hand. "This is where Caldwell was supposed to bring the boy," he said. "Not Fairview, not the state." Edith took the card. The address was not a hospital, it was a house, and beneath it in smaller letters was a name. Mrs. Lillian Wren. Edith looked up. "Who is she?" Dr. Sutherland's voice lowered. "A woman who helps children disappear," he said. Edith felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. The phrase was impossible, and yet, within the last 10 minutes, nothing had seemed entirely impossible. "Disappear where?" Edith asked. Dr. Sutherland held Edith's gaze. "Into better lives," he said. "If we are fast enough." He lifted the photograph again, and his eyes lingered on the boy's face. "And if we are not," he added, "then this picture may be all that remains to prove he existed at all." Outside the office, somewhere down the corridor, a door slammed. Voices rose, distant, indistinct. A man's laugh, too casual for a hospital. Dr. Sutherland's hand tightened on the photograph. "They may already know," he said. Edith's throat tightened. "Then I should go now," she said. Dr. Sutherland nodded, and for the first time since she entered the building, he looked directly afraid. "Yes," he said. "Go now, and Miss Hart." She paused at the door. He held out the photograph. "Do not let it out of your hands," he said. "Not for a moment." Edith took it, slipped it back into the waxed paper, and placed it against her body inside the satchel. She left the office and walked down the stairwell with a composure she did not feel. She passed nurses and orderlies without meeting their eyes. She did not run. Running would draw attention. At the front desk, the clerk did not look up. Outside, the city air smelled of coal smoke and wet wood. Streetcars clanged, horses stamped, men shouted at one another across the street. Portland continued as if nothing had changed. Edith stepped onto the sidewalk and realized, with a clarity that made her almost dizzy, that she had crossed an invisible line. In the morning, she had been a woman who catalogued other people's histories. By afternoon, she was carrying a photograph that could ruin men who called themselves protectors of the public. And somewhere, in a place called Fairview, there was a boy who looked like a child and stared like an adult, waiting to be sent back. Edith adjusted the satchel strap on her shoulder and turned toward the train station. Behind her, in the hospital's upper windows, a curtain moved as if someone was watching, and at the edge of her mind, the pencil line on the back of the photograph repeated itself, like a sentence the world had already written. He said the sea would come early. Edith Hart bought her ticket to Salem with cash and a false calm. At Union Station, Portland looked like a city that had decided it was already modern. Men in stiff collars hurried beneath the iron trusses. Porters called out destinations: Tacoma, Spokane, San Francisco, while the smell of coal smoke, mixed with wet wool and the sharp sweetness of oranges from a vendor's crate. The newspapers on the stand were stacked in clean piles, their headlines blaring politics and progress. None of them said anything about a missing lighthouse keeper. None of them said anything about Fairview. Edith kept the satchel pressed against her side as if it were a second rib cage. Inside it, wrapped in waxed paper, the photograph felt impossibly heavy for a thin rectangle of printed light. Dr. Sutherland's warning still rang in her ears. Do not let it out of your hands. Not for a moment. She chose a seat near the rear of the coach, where she could watch who boarded and who looked too carefully. When the train began to move, the wooden car swayed like a tired animal. Portland slid away, brick, then timber, then the wet gray of November fields. Edith stared out the window and forced her mind into inventory, the way she did with collections. What she had: a photograph taken at Cape Disappointment Station, a hospital band from Fairview, Salem, a letter from Henry Caldwell that implied the state would reclaim the boy, an address for Mrs. Lillian Wren on Lovejoy Street, Portland, a hint that a file existed in Astoria, marked S.A. What she did not have: the boy, the truth about Henry Caldwell, any protection from men who could call themselves the proper channels. The train clicked over a bridge and the river below flashed dark as ink. Edith imagined the Columbia Bar in storm, a mouth full of teeth. She pictured Henry Caldwell on a cliff path, wind tearing at his coat, hiding the tin where only someone stubborn would search. She pictured him glancing back, not toward the sea, but toward the land. He was afraid of something on shore. Her fingers found the edge of the photograph through the satchel's cloth. She did not open it. She did not need to. The boy's eyes were already in her mind, steady, unreadable, watching. A conductor passed, punching tickets. When he reached Edith, he paused. "Miss," he said. And there was nothing strange about the word. Yet Edith felt the sudden tightening of nerves, like a rope being drawn taut. "Yes," she replied. He looked at her ticket, punched it, and handed it back. His gaze lingered a fraction too long on her satchel. "That's a fine bag," he said casually. Edith's smile was practiced. "It belonged to my father." The conductor nodded, moved on. Edith released a breath she had not realized she was holding. She arrived in Salem in late afternoon beneath a sky the color of unwashed linen. The station was smaller than Portland's and smelled of damp boards. Outside, the streets were muddy and busy with wagons. Salem felt like a town attempting to behave like a capital. Fairview lay on the outskirts. beyond the polite downtown and the courthouse square. Edith knew its reputation in the way people knew the reputation of a prison. Not from official descriptions, but from the way voices lowered when it was mentioned. She could have gone directly there. But Dr. Sutherland had said two things that changed the order of her steps. They may already know, and Mrs. Wren helps children disappear. Edith returned to Portland that same night on the southbound train, because staying in Salem without allies felt like stepping into a room full of men who already had her name. Portland, after dark, was a different city. Street lamps flickered in puddles, saloons glowed, and the wind off the river carried the smell of tar and fish. Edith walked quickly, keeping to lit streets. Lovejoy Street sat in a neighborhood of modest houses and boarding rooms where the city's edges blurred into yards of damp grass. The address Dr. Sutherland had written led her to a narrow two-story home with a porch, sagging slightly at one corner. A single lamp burned behind a curtain. Edith hesitated at the gate. If Mrs. Wren truly helped children disappear, then she was either the most compassionate person Edith would meet, or the most dangerous. Edith raised her hand and knocked. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the curtain moved. A face appeared briefly and vanished. The door opened only as far as the chain allowed. A woman looked out at Edith with eyes that did not waste time on politeness. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair pinned back and a scarf tucked into her collar. Her hands, visible at the edge of the door, were ink-stained. "You're late," the woman said. Edith blinked. "I'm sorry." The chain rattled as the woman unhooked it. The door opened fully. "I'm Mrs. Wren," she said. "Come in, and close the door behind you." Edith stepped inside. The house was warm, smelling of tea, coal smoke, and something medicinal. Camphor, perhaps. A narrow corridor led to a sitting room where a desk sat beneath a lamp. The room looked lived in a deliberate way. Shelves lined with books, a stack of envelopes, a basket of sewing. On the wall hung a framed certificate. With ornate lettering, Edith could not read at a glance. Mrs. Wren watched Edith remove her gloves. "Dr. Sutherland told you to come," Edith said. "I know," Mrs. Wren replied. "He sent a boy here once, years ago. Not this boy. Another." Her gaze dropped to Edith's satchel. "You have the photograph." Edith's fingers tightened on the strap. "How do you know?" Mrs. Wren's expression did not change. "Because you're holding that bag like it contains your lungs." Edith swallowed and drew the photograph out, still wrapped, and placed it on the desk. Mrs. Wren did not touch it immediately. She sat opposite Edith, as if establishing that this was a conversation and not a confiscation. "Tell me what you know," she said. Edith told her. She described the tin, the letter, the hospital band, the mention of Fairview, the missing keeper. She described the boy's eyes and the line on the back. He said the sea would come early. Mrs. Wren listened without interrupting. When Edith finished, the woman's face had gone still in the way of someone who had heard bad news before. "Caldwell," Mrs. Wren said softly. "A lighthouse man. You know him?" "Not well," Mrs. Wren admitted. "But I know the kind of man who works that coast. Quiet, stubborn, used to keeping a light burning while the world tries to put it out." Edith's mouth tightened. Then why would he take this boy? Mrs. Wren finally reached for the photograph and turned it toward the lamp. Her eyes moved to the band, to the boy's face, to the woman holding him. "This was taken at the station," she said. "And that woman, that's not a nurse, that's someone's sister, or someone's wife. She looks like she'd die before letting him go," Edith whispered, surprised by her own emotion. Mrs. Wren did not answer the sentiment. Instead, she said, "Do you know what Fairview is, Miss Hart?" "A state institution," Edith said, "for children." Mrs. Wren's mouth twitched as if the word children was too gentle. It is a place where the state sends people it does not want to understand. Sometimes they call it charity. Sometimes they call it science. Edith felt the faint horror vibration of it in her chest. Not fear of ghosts, but fear of systems. Mrs. Wren set the photograph down and looked at Edith directly. "Tell me why you came to me," she said. Edith hesitated. "Because Dr. Sutherland said you help children disappear." Mrs. Wren's eyes held hers. "And would you ask that of me, if you thought the child was ordinary?" Edith's breath caught. It was an unfair question, sharp, designed to cut through moral fog. Edith looked away, then back. "No," she admitted. Mrs. Wren nodded once, as if that honesty mattered. "Then tell me what is wrong with him," Mrs. Wren said. Edith felt the weight of Henry Caldwell's words. "He is older. I cannot explain it in writing." "I don't know," Edith said. "But the photograph, his eyes, he looks like someone who has seen too much," Mrs. Wren finished. Edith's skin prickled. "Yes." Mrs. Wren folded her hands. "There are children like that," she said quietly. "Not because they're devils, because the world has been unkind, because adults speak around them as if they are furniture, and the children learn to listen." Edith wanted to believe that explanation. She wanted a simple truth that could be carried and set down, but the pencil line on the back of the photograph did not allow it. Mrs. Wren rose and moved to the mantel, where a small brass bell sat. She did not ring it. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out a thin ledger bound in cloth. "I will tell you what Dr. Sutherland will not put in writing," Mrs. Wren said. "There is a committee." Edith's stomach tightened again. "A committee of physicians and lawmakers who believe they can improve society by sorting people," Mrs. Wren continued. "They decide who may marry, who may have children, who should be locked away." Edith had heard whispers of such ideas in lectures, always dressed in the language of progress, but hearing it spoken in a small, warm room made it uglier. "And this boy?" Edith asked. Mrs. Wren opened the ledger. "2 months ago," she said, "a child was transferred to Fairview from a private facility in Nebraska, a place that called itself a sanitarium for nervous disorders, though it was closer to a prison with prayers." Edith's throat tightened. "Nebraska." Mrs. Wren traced a line with her finger. "The boy was listed as Samuel A. No surname, just the initial." Edith's pulse jumped. "S.A." Mrs. Wren looked up. "Exactly. That file in Astoria, if Caldwell wrote it, that is what he meant. Samuel A. It is a label, not a name." Edith felt cold. "Why Astoria?" "Because the coast has its own ways," Mrs. Wren said. "The life-saving service keeps records. The lighthouse service keeps records. The port keeps records. If a child arrived by ship or by rail and was moved quietly through the port, Astoria would hold traces, not officially, but in the shadow ledgers." Edith stared at her. "You've done this before." Mrs. Wren's voice was flat. "I have tried." Edith's hands clenched in her lap. "So where is he now?" Mrs. Wren closed the ledger. "If Caldwell had time, the boy would be somewhere the state cannot easily reach. But Caldwell is missing." "And the woman in the photograph?" Edith asked. "Who is she?" Mrs. Wren looked again at the image. Her eyes narrowed, searching memory. "I've seen her," she said slowly. "Not her face, her posture. There was a woman who came to me last summer, thin, exhausted, her hands raw as if she had scrubbed floors for a living. She asked about a child from Fairview. She didn't say his name. She didn't say her own. But she had that look." Mrs. Wren tapped the photograph lightly. "The look of a person who has decided to steal something back from the world." "Did you help her?" Edith asked. Mrs. Wren's silence answered before her words did. "I gave her an address," she said at last. a place in Ilwaco where a keeper might look the other way. I thought I was helping her buy time. Edith's mouth went dry. So you sent her to the lighthouse? Mrs. Wren's gaze held Edith's. Yes. Edith felt a slow wave of dread. If Mrs. Wren had sent the woman to the coast, and Henry Caldwell had hidden the tin, then the chain of events was no longer random. It was a plan that had gone wrong. How did Caldwell become involved? Edith asked. Mrs. Wren's eyes moved to the window, as if she could see the coast from here. Men on the coast don't like the state, she said. Not because they are saints, because they have seen bodies washed up with numbers tied to them, because they have seen ships turned away, because they know what it looks like when paperwork decides whether a person lives. Edith could not help it. She asked the question that had been chewing at her since the hospital. Do you think Caldwell was killed? Mrs. Wren looked back at her. By a person? She asked. Or by a system? Edith did not answer. Mrs. Wren pushed the photograph toward Edith. You should not be holding this in your office, she said. You should not be walking the streets with it. If the wrong man sees it, he will take it and call it evidence, and you will never see it again. What do I do then? Edith asked. Mrs. Wren stood and went to a cupboard. She opened it and removed a thick book, an old Bible, its cover worn. She opened it not to scripture, but to a hollowed space inside, where papers were wrapped in cloth. She placed the book on the desk. This is what you do, she said. You go to Astoria. You find that file. You copy what you can. You do not take the original. You will not get far with it. You take notes, names, dates, transfers, anything that proves the boy existed beyond a band and a photograph. Edith's voice shook slightly. And if they stop me? Mrs. Wren's eyes hardened. Then you do what women have always done, she said. You become boring. You become polite. You become impossible to throw out without making a scene. Edith felt a grim humor twist in her chest. And after Astoria, Mrs. Wren reached into the hollow Bible and removed a folded paper. An itinerary, written in neat script. A train leaves Portland for Tacoma at dawn, she said. From Tacoma, you can reach Ilwaco by steamer. The coast towns listen to each other. Someone there will know if a boy appeared and then vanished. Edith stared at the paper. You're sending me into it. Mrs. Wren's voice softened, just a fraction. I'm giving you the same chance the woman in that photograph asked for, she said. Time. Edith glanced at the door. Do you think someone followed me here? Mrs. Wren did not answer immediately. She crossed to the window and lifted the curtain by a finger's width. The street outside was wet and quiet, lit by a single lamp. For a moment, there was only the sound of distant wagon wheels. Then Mrs. Wren let the curtain fall. There was a man on the corner when you knocked, she said calmly. He isn't there now. Edith's skin went cold. What kind of man? The kind who does not buy anything from the shop and does not go anywhere, Mrs. Wren said. The kind who thinks women don't notice. Edith's pulse hammered. Mrs. Wren returned to the desk and slid something across to Edith. A small revolver. Old, compact. Edith stared at it, as if it were a snake. I can't, she began. You can, Mrs. Wren said. You don't have to use it, but you will carry it. Men respect metal more than they respect your no. Edith's fingers hovered over it. Her father had taught her to shoot tin cans on a farm outside Eugene when she was 15, not because he believed she would need it, but because he believed girls should not be helpless. She picked up the revolver and felt its cold weight settle into her palm. Mrs. Wren watched her with the blunt approval of someone who valued actions over words. One more thing, Mrs. Wren said. What? Mrs. Wren leaned forward, lowering her voice. The boy, she said. If you find him, do not speak to him like a child. Edith frowned. What do you mean? Mrs. Wren's eyes flicked to the photograph. Some children learn to survive by becoming small, she said. This one may survive by becoming sharp. If he believes you are lying to him, he will... She stopped, searching for the correct word. He will arrange you. Edith's throat tightened. Arrange me. Mrs. Wren's face did not change. To get what he needs, she said. Edith stared at the woman, trying to decide whether this was melodrama. But Mrs. Wren had been too accurate about everything else. Edith placed the revolver in the satchel beneath the papers, her hand brushing the photograph as she did. The boy's eyes seemed to press through the waxed paper, as if he could sense movement. Why are you helping me? Edith asked suddenly. You don't know me. Mrs. Wren's gaze softened in a way that was almost invisible. Because women are always asked to clean up after men's decisions, she said, and because I have watched too many children vanish into institutions and become paperwork. She stood and opened the door. Go now, she said, before the street gets too quiet. Edith paused at the threshold. The night air bit her cheeks. She looked back once. Mrs. Wren's silhouette stood in the warm light like a cutout from a different story. One where women saved each other in ways that never made newspapers. Edith stepped out. The street lamp buzzed faintly. Water dripped from the eaves. She walked quickly toward the main road, forcing herself not to look behind her too often. When she reached the corner, she saw what Mrs. Wren had meant. A cigarette ember glowed briefly in the dark near an alley mouth, then vanished. Edith's stomach turned. She did not run. She turned left instead of right, then right instead of left, weaving through blocks until the pattern broke. At a busier street, she blended into a cluster of men leaving a saloon, their laughter loud enough to cover her breath. At last, she reached a boarding house where she had once stayed while cataloging a donation. The landlady recognized her and clucked in disapproval at the hour, but accepted Edith's money without questions. In her room, Edith locked the door and sat on the bed with the satchel in her lap. She took out the photograph again and unwrapped it. Under the lamp, the image looked even more unreal. The woman's arms were around the boy, as if she were trying to hold time itself in place. The boy's face remained unchanged. Calm, intense, watching. Edith turned it over and read the penciled line again. September 16, 1912. He said the sea would come early. Edith's skin crawled with a sensation she did not want to name. Prediction. Not supernatural, she told herself. Not magic, but knowledge. Children could overhear. Men could gossip. Weather could be read by those who lived with it. And yet the phrase sounded like a warning spoken by someone who had already lived through the storm. Edith returned the photograph to the satchel, then took out her notebook and wrote a list. Astoria, Courthouse, File, S.A., Ilwaco, Cape Disappointment, Life-Saving Station Fairview, Salem, Transfer Records. Henry Caldwell, missing. She wrote one more line beneath them, smaller. Who is the woman? Outside her window, the wind pushed rain against the glass in soft taps like fingers. Edith lay down fully clothed with the satchel beside her and the revolver under the pillow, feeling ridiculous and terrified at once. Sleep came in thin strips, broken by images. A lighthouse stare, a tin box, a boy's eyes, a hospital band. At some hour before dawn, she woke sharply. There had been a sound, not loud, not a crash, a careful sound like a foot shifting on a porch board that knew how to complain. Edith held her breath. The boarding house was quiet. Then faintly, from the corridor outside her door, paper sliding against wood. Edith sat up, heart hammering. She reached beneath the pillow and wrapped her fingers around the revolver. For several seconds, nothing. Then she moved silently, step by step, and pressed her ear to the door. A whisper of movement retreated down the hall. Edith waited until the silence felt thick, then she unlocked the door and opened it a crack. On the floor outside her room lay an envelope. No stamp, no name, just a single word written across the front in a careful hand. Return. Edith stared at it until the letters seemed to blur. She knew then with absolute certainty that she was not simply chasing an old story. Someone was chasing her back. Edith left Portland before dawn. The boarding house hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and lamp oil. She walked softly, satchel tight against her ribs, and let herself out into the blue-black cold. The city was quieter at that hour, but not asleep. There were always men awake near the waterfront, always wagons moving in the dark for work that paid better before daylight. At Union Station, she bought a ticket north with cash and a name she did not intend to keep. Evelyn Hart, she said, steady. The clerk barely looked up. The envelope marked return sat in her coat pocket like a stone. She had not opened it in the boarding house, not because she was brave, but because she had learned something in archives. Unopened things held their power more cleanly. The moment you read them, they entered you. On the train, with the windows fogged and the coach half empty, she finally slid her finger under the flap. Inside was no letterhead, no seal, just a single sheet torn from a cheap pad. Miss Hart, you are holding property of the state of Oregon. Return it to Fairview and no questions will be asked. Continue and you will be included in the record. There was no signature, no date. The handwriting was neat, almost clerical, designed to feel inevitable. Edith folded it again, more carefully than necessary, and returned it to her pocket. Included in the record. The phrase made her think of burial. She watched fir trees pass in gray streaks. At a bend, the river appeared. Black water and white foam, the sort of current that could carry secrets out to sea. She could not shake the feeling that the storm at Cape Disappointment had not merely taken Henry Caldwell. It had been used. Astoria rose from the hills like a city built out of wet wood and ambition. Its docks bristled with masts. Smoke from mills hung low over rooftops. The air smelled of fish, sawdust, and tar. Edith walked from the station toward the courthouse with a briskness that dared anyone to question her. She wore a plain hat and a coat that made her look like any other working woman. Her satchel stayed at her side, and her fingers touched the revolver once beneath the papers, reassuring herself it was still real. The courthouse stood on a slight rise, a square brick building with wide steps worn smooth by boots. Inside, the corridor echoed with men's voices and the scrape of chairs. At the clerk's window, a young man in a sleeve garter looked up with mild irritation. "Yes," Edith offered a small, apologetic smile. "Good morning. I'm seeking a file." "What kind of file?" he asked, already sounding tired. "Port records," Edith said, because it was close enough to true. "A matter relating to a transfer. Initials only. S.A." The clerk's expression changed in a way Edith recognized. The flicker of someone hearing a word they have been told not to acknowledge. "We don't keep files by initials," he said quickly. Edith kept her voice soft. "Then perhaps by date," she said. "Late summer, September." The clerk pushed his spectacles up his nose, as if that gesture could push the conversation away. "I'm sorry," he said. "There is nothing like that." Edith nodded as if accepting defeat. Then she did what Mrs. Wren had suggested. She became impossible. "I understand," Edith said, and she did not move away from the window. "Perhaps I should speak to the chief clerk." The young man's jaw tightened. "He's busy. I can wait," Edith replied pleasantly. "Miss, I have all day," Edith said. A line formed behind her. A man cleared his throat, annoyed. The clerk glanced at the line, then back at Edith. calculating whether it would be easier to make her vanish or to give her something to chew on. He lowered his voice. "Who sent you?" Edith leaned in slightly, as if embarrassed. "Dr. Sutherland," she said. "Portland Harbor Hospital." The clerk's face went paler. That name meant something here. Doctors and ports were tangled. Sick men came off ships and ended up in ledgers. The clerk swallowed. "Wait," he muttered, and disappeared through a back door. Edith stood still, heart beating hard. She watched the corridor. She watched the shadowed doorway. She watched the way men glanced at her satchel, then at her face, deciding if she was trouble worth attention. After several minutes, the clerk returned with a folder. Not marked SA, marked Salvage, MISC. He slid it across the counter without meeting her eyes. "This is what you want," he said quietly. "You didn't get it from me." Edith's fingers brushed the folder. It felt heavier than it should, full of paper that had been held too tightly. "Thank you," she said. The clerk's voice dropped further. "You should go," he added, "before someone notices you're here." Edith took the folder and moved to a bench near a window. She sat with her body angled so the corridor could not see the contents directly. Her hands were steady from practice, not calm. Inside were receipts and notes, salvage claims, dock logs, a written statement about a crate of canned goods lost to water. Then halfway through, a sheet of pale blue paper, folded twice. On the front, "Confidential transfer." Ward Edith unfolded it and felt the room tilt. Name, Samuel A. Age, 11, origin, private facility, Nebraska destination, Fairview, Salem or temporary placement, coastal station, CD, authorized by, a signature. Her eyes went to the signature and stopped. She could not read it fully. But the flourish at the end, an old-fashioned loop, looked like the handwriting on the note that had been slipped under her door. A second sheet was clipped behind it. A typed memorandum on thin paper, the letters faint. Subject displays abnormal affect. Appears to anticipate inquiry. Responds to adults with inappropriate familiarity. Recommending expedited containment. Edith read the line again. Appears to anticipate inquiry. It was almost comical. The bureaucratic attempt to describe something that frightened them. At the bottom, another line in pencil, different handwriting. He repeats what you're about to say. Not always, only when he wants to. Edith's breath caught. She turned the sheet over. There was an address. Not Fairview, not Salem. A location in Astoria, near the docks, with a note. Held overnight prior to transfer. Edith folded the papers back with care and returned them to the folder. Her fingers had gone cold. So the boy had been in Astoria. Not officially. Not as a patient. As cargo. She rose, tucked the folder into her satchel, and walked out of the courthouse into a cold drizzle that felt like needles on her cheeks. The docks lay downhill. The streets grew rougher, noisier. Men shouted over crates. Fish guts slicked the boards. A steam whistle groaned somewhere close, and for a moment, the sound resembled a low animal moan. Edith found the address. A warehouse that smelled of brine and old wood. A faded sign read, Columbia Mercantile, though half the letters were missing. She hesitated. Then she entered. Inside, it was dim and cavernous. The light thin through grimy windows. A man in a vest sat at a desk with a ledger, chewing on something. He looked up. "We're closed to the public." Edith swallowed and summoned a voice that sounded official. "I'm from Portland," she said. "I'm reviewing a transfer error. A child held here in September." The man's eyes narrowed, then flicked to her satchel. "We don't keep children." "You did," Edith said softly, and slid the folder just far enough out of her satchel for him to see the word, confidential, without reading it. The man's face changed. Irritation drained into caution. "Who are you, really?" he asked. Edith did not answer. She waited. The man exhaled through his nose. "You shouldn't be asking," he said. "I shouldn't be answering," Edith replied. That seemed to amuse him in a tired way. He stood, wiped his hands on his trousers, and jerked his chin toward a back corridor. "Come," he said. "Quickly." Edith followed. Behind the main room was a small office, and beyond that, a narrow space that might once have been a storeroom. The air was colder here. The boards creaked. The man stopped at a door that looked heavier than it needed to be. He glanced at Edith. "You didn't hear this from me," he said. Then he opened the door. Inside was a room barely large enough for a bed. There was no bed, only a bench, a bucket, and iron rings mounted into the wall as if someone might need to be tied. Edith's stomach turned. "This is where they kept him," the man said. "Overnight, maybe 2 nights. They paid well to make it quiet." Edith looked at the rings. "Who are they?" The man shook his head as if the answer would poison him. "Men from Salem," he said, "and one from Portland. A doctor, I think, or he dressed like one." Edith forced herself to ask, "Was the boy violent?" The man's eyes drifted to the corner of the ceiling, not wanting to remember. "No," he said, "not like that." "Then why the rings?" The man gave a short, humorless laugh. "Because grown men get frightened when a child looks at them like he knows their sins." Edith's skin prickled. "Tell me about him," she said. The man hesitated, then spoke as if confessing. "He didn't cry," he said. "Didn't beg, just sat, like he was waiting for a train. The first night I brought him bread and water. He looked at me and said, 'You're going to ask if I'm hungry.'" Edith's breath caught. "You hadn't asked," the man added quickly, as if defending himself. "I hadn't said a word, and he said it anyway." Edith tried to keep her face neutral. "And then?" she asked. The man rubbed his jaw. "Then he smiled," he said, and his voice tightened. "Not a child's smile. A knowing smile." Edith's throat went dry. "Did he say anything else?" The man looked at her as if deciding whether to stop. He said, "The sea will come early," he whispered. Edith felt her knees go weak. That phrase, again. Not written only on the photograph. Spoken by the boy. Spoken here in this room to a dockman who had no reason to care about storms. Edith forced herself to breathe. "When he said that," she asked, "did you believe him?" The man's eyes darted away. "I laughed," he admitted. "I told him he should save fortunes in Portland, and he said—" The man swallowed. "He said, not fortunes, funerals." Edith's stomach turned sharply. "And then the storm came," the man said, voice low. "Not that week, but later, October, when the lighthouse man went missing." Edith's mind raced. If the boy had predicted the storm that took Henry Caldwell, months in advance, then either it was coincidence of a cruel kind, or the boy had access to information no child should have had. Or the boy had learned how to make adults afraid by feeding them the right words at the right time. Mrs. Wren had warned her. "He will arrange you." Edith backed out of the small room, and the man shut the door quickly, as if afraid the space itself might leak. Edith asked the next question with care. "Where did they take him after this?" "North," the man said. "Ilwaco, I think, or the station near there. They said the coast was safer while the paperwork settled." Edith's pulse hammered. "Did anyone accompany him?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "A woman came," he said. "Not with them. Later. She asked about a child. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She had money, but she didn't know how to hold it like rich people do." Edith's heart tightened. "Did she see him?" The man's mouth pulled grimly. "No, he said. He was already gone. But she left something. What? Edith demanded. The man walked to his desk and opened a drawer. He removed a small object wrapped in cloth and held it out. Edith unwrapped it carefully. A button, not an ordinary button. It was metal, stamped with an emblem, an anchor and a lighthouse. Around it, faint letters, U.S. Life-Saving Service. Edith stared. The object was both nothing and everything. A button could fall from any uniform at any time, but it could also be a sign, a message left for someone who understood. Henry Caldwell had been connected to the lighthouse. The life-saving servicemen worked near the station. If the woman had left this, she was marking a path. Edith rewrapped the button and placed it in her satchel. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked the man. His eyes hardened. "Because I don't like cages," he said, "and because I heard what happened to the lighthouse man. If this is connected—" He trailed off, unwilling to finish. "It is," Edith said. She left the warehouse with her mind burning and her hands cold. On the street outside, the drizzle had turned to a thin rain. Men moved under slickers. Wagons splashed through mud. The town looked ordinary, and that was the worst part. How easily cruelty hid inside normal days. Edith walked toward the telegraph office near the docks. She needed to tell Mrs. Wren what she had found. She needed to warn Dr. Sutherland. She needed to decide whether to go to Fairview or to the coast first. But as she approached the telegraph window, she saw a man standing across the street, watching her. He did not pretend to read a paper. He did not speak to anyone. He simply stood where the rain could paint him into the background, his hat brim low. When Edith stopped, he stopped. When she moved, he moved. Her throat tightened. She turned and walked toward a busier street, then cut down an alley between buildings, her boots slipping slightly on wet boards. She heard footsteps behind her, measured, not hurried, confident. Edith's fingers closed around the revolver in her satchel. She did not pull it out. Not yet. At the end of the alley, a hand reached out and seized her arm. Edith spun, breath sharp. The man was not the watcher. This one was younger, with a uniform coat and a badge pinned to his chest. Local police. His grip was firm but not violent. "Miss," he said, voice controlled. "You're Edith Hart." It was not a question. Edith's blood went cold. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," she said. The policeman's mouth tightened. "No," he said. "I'm not. You're wanted for questioning." "By whom?" Edith demanded. He glanced toward the street, toward the watcher, who now approached at an unhurried pace. "By the state," the policeman said quietly. "And you're going to come with me." Edith's heart pounded so hard it made her ears ring. She pictured Fairview's gates. She pictured the rings in the warehouse room. She pictured the boy's eyes, calm and sharp. Then she did the only thing Mrs. Wren's world allowed, when a woman's no was not enough. Edith drove her heel down hard on the policeman's instep. He cursed, grip loosening just enough. Edith yanked her arm free and ran. She ran toward the docks, toward noise and bodies and confusion, her satchel slamming against her side. Behind her, the policeman shouted. Men turned, startled. Someone swore. Edith pushed through a cluster of fishermen unloading crates, nearly tripping on rope. She cut left, then right, ducking beneath a hanging line. Her lungs burned. She could hear footsteps, close. Then a voice, low and chillingly calm, cut through the chaos behind her. "Miss Hart," not shouted, spoken as if he knew she would stop. Edith did not stop, but the sound of her name, said without urgency, sent a colder fear through her than any chase, because it sounded like certainty. And certainty, Edith realized, was what the system always had. Unless she found the boy first. Unless she found Henry Caldwell, alive or dead. unless she found proof that could not be folded into a file and buried. Edith reached the end of the dock and saw a steamer preparing to depart. Smoke rising, men boarding, the gangplank still down. She did not think. She ran up the plank, shoved past a deckhand, and disappeared into the crowd as the whistle began to blow. Behind her, on the dock, the watcher stood still in the rain. He raised 2 fingers to the brim of his hat, in a gesture that was almost polite. Almost. The steamer pulled away from Astoria, under a sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to be day. Edith stood among fishermen and a mother with 2 small children bundled like parcels, her hat brim low, her eyes fixed on the dock as it slid backward into rain. She expected pursuit. Boots on the gangplank, a hand on her shoulder, the cold authority of Miss Hart. No one followed onto the boat. Instead, she saw the watcher once more, a shape in a dark coat near the pilings. He did not hurry, he did not shout. He simply remained there, as if confident the water itself would deliver her back. Edith's stomach tightened at the thought. She moved below deck, found a corner seat near a porthole, and opened her satchel, just enough to reassure herself the folder was still there. Confidential transfer, Ward. The papers within felt like proof and like a sentence. Beside them lay the button from the U.S. Life-Saving Service, metal cold against cloth. A sign, a trail, a warning. She told herself it meant Henry Caldwell had allies, or at least that someone, somewhere, had tried. When the steamer reached Ilwaco hours later, the rain had eased to a mist. The town, crouched between forest and sea, smelling of salt and wood smoke. Men unloaded crates. A bell rang somewhere distant. The world looked ordinary, and Edith now distrusted ordinary things. She walked uphill toward the life-saving service station first, not the lighthouse. Mrs. Wren had said coast towns listen to each other. The servicemen listened most of all, trained to notice what others missed. The station sat back from the beach, a long building painted in fading white, with boats pulled up like sleeping beasts. A flag hung limp in the damp air. A man in a thick sweater stood outside mending a line. Edith approached with a steady pace. "I'm looking for information," she said. The man looked up, his face weathered, his eyes bright and wary. "About what?" "Henry Caldwell," Edith said, "assistant keeper at Cape Disappointment." The man's jaw tightened. "You're late," he said, echoing Mrs. Wren's first words, and the coincidence unsettled Edith more than it should have. "I'm not family," Edith added quickly. I'm from Portland. I received something of his." The man studied her. "What kind of something?" Edith hesitated, then reached into her satchel and produced the life-saving service button, wrapped in cloth. She held it out without letting him take it. Recognition flickered across his face. "That's ours," he said. "It was left in Astoria," Edith said, "by a woman asking about a child." The line mender's eyes narrowed. He glanced toward the station doors as if weighing whether to involve anyone else. "Come inside," he said quietly. Edith followed him into the station, where the air was warmer and smelled of coffee and wet wool. A few men sat at a table, playing cards, but their hands paused when they saw her. Women did not come into the station without a reason. The line mender, his name, he told her, was Boatswain Harper, led her into a small office. "Tell me what you're really doing here," Harper said. Edith placed the button and the folder on the desk. "I'm looking for a boy," she said. "He was transferred through Astoria, under the name Samuel A. He was placed temporarily at Cape Disappointment." Harper's face went still. "We don't take wards," he said automatically. "You did," Edith replied. "Quietly." Harper looked at the folder without touching it, as if it carried contagion. "Who told you that?" he asked. Edith considered lying. Then she decided truth was safer, because it could be tested. "Dr. Sutherland," she said. "And Mrs. Lillian Wren." Harper's eyes flickered. He knew both names, that was clear. He exhaled. "This isn't station business," he said, "but—" He stopped, then said the thing Edith had been hoping for and dreading. "There was a boy." Edith's pulse hammered. "Where is he?" Harper's jaw worked. "Not here," he said. "Not now." "When was he here?" Edith demanded. "September," Harper said. "A woman brought him in the evening. Not a wife of any keeper. Not from town. She looked like she'd walked 100 miles and still had another 100 in her." His eyes shifted to the photograph when Edith slid it across the desk. "That's her." Edith's throat tightened. "Do you know her name?" "No," Harper said. "She didn't give it. She asked for Caldwell." "Henry Caldwell," Edith said. Harper nodded. "He came down from the light after dark. I saw him with her." He didn't look surprised. He looked prepared. Edith's mouth went dry. Prepared for what? Harper's gaze dropped to the photograph again, to the boy's face. "For trouble," he said. Edith leaned forward. "Tell me about the boy." Harper hesitated. Then, in the flat voice of a man describing something he wished he could unsee, he spoke. "He didn't act right," Harper said. "Not like a child. He watched, he listened, he spoke when it suited him." Edith's skin prickled. Harper continued, eyes distant. "One of my men, O'Donnell, made a joke to calm the woman. He said, 'If the boy's trouble, we'll toss him in the surf and let the Pacific raise him.'" Edith's stomach clenched. "And the boy," Harper said, looked at O'Donnell and said, "You won't say that again after Tuesday." Edith's breath caught. "Tuesday?" Harper nodded once. "The next Tuesday, O'Donnell slipped on the rocks and broke his leg so bad the bone came through. Could have drowned if we hadn't been close." Edith's mind raced. Coincidence? Prediction? Or manipulation? If the boy had arranged a rope, a slick rock, a distraction. "Did anyone see the boy do anything?" Edith asked. Harper shook his head. "No," he said. "That's what made it worse." Edith forced herself to steady her voice. "How long did he stay?" 2 weeks, Harper said. "Maybe a little more. Caldwell took responsibility. Said the boy was a relative. Said the state was mistaken." "And the woman?" Edith asked. Harper's expression hardened. "Gone," he said. "She didn't stay. She kissed the boy on the head like she was sealing him into something. Then she left before dawn." Edith felt a strange ache at the image, tenderness mixed with desperation. "And then?" Edith asked. Harper rubbed a hand over his face. "Then men from Salem arrived," he said. "Not in uniform, in suits. They had papers." Edith's throat tightened. "Fairview." Harper didn't say the name, but he didn't deny it. "Caldwell argued," Harper said. "Quiet at first, then loud. I heard it from the yard. He told them the boy wasn't theirs." Edith leaned in. "What did they say?" Harper's eyes sharpened. "They said the boy wasn't a boy," he replied. Edith felt cold. "What does that mean?" she asked. Harper swallowed. "I don't know," he said. "They said he was abnormal. They said he was a danger. They said he belonged to the state." Edith's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. "Did they take him?" Harper hesitated, then shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Not that day." Edith's heart pounded. "Why not?" Harper looked away. "Because Caldwell wouldn't let them," he said. Edith's voice dropped. "How?" Harper didn't answer immediately. He opened a drawer and pulled out a folded paper, thick, official, stamped. He slid it across the desk. It was a copy of a life-saving service incident report. The handwriting was careful, formal. At the bottom, in a different hand, a note had been added. "Assistant Keeper Caldwell requests assistance. Claims state men intend unlawful removal of ward." Edith's pulse raced. "There was a confrontation," she whispered. Harper's jaw clenched. "There was," he said. "Caldwell told me to take my men and keep the suits off station grounds. He said he would handle the light." Edith looked up. "And you did?" Harper's eyes narrowed. "I did," he said. "Because we don't like suits with papers telling us what's lawful when the sea is the only law out here." Edith felt both gratitude and dread. "And where was the boy during this?" she asked. Harper's voice lowered. "Inside," he said. "In the oil room." Edith's skin prickled. "Locked in." "Not locked," Harper said. "Hidden." Edith remembered the warehouse rings in Astoria and felt nausea. Harper stared at the photograph again. "The boy wasn't crying," he said. "He wasn't pleading. He was listening, like he wanted to hear the men argue about him." Edith's throat tightened. "Then what happened?" Harper's face tightened as if the memory still had teeth. "The suits left," he said, "but one of them said, 'This is not over.'" Edith felt the weight of that phrase as if it were spoken to her directly. "And 2 weeks later," Harper added, "the storm hit." Edith's breath caught. "The storm that took Caldwell." Harper nodded once. Edith stared at the desk, at the reports and the photograph, trying to make the sequence into something that did not sound like a curse. "If the boy predicted the storm," she said carefully, "why would Caldwell be taken by it?" Harper's eyes went sharp. "Maybe he wasn't," he said. Edith looked up quickly. Harper leaned forward. "The sea takes men," he said, "but it doesn't usually take their boots." Edith's heart pounded. "Boots?" Harper nodded toward a corner of the office. "We found Caldwell's cap," he said. "We found a torn glove, but no boots. Caldwell didn't go anywhere without his boots." Edith felt a cold thread of possibility. "He staged it," she whispered. Harper did not say yes. He did not say no. He simply said, "A man can disappear on that coast if he wants to. The sea is convenient." Edith's mind raced. Henry Caldwell had written, "If I am taken, or if the sea takes me." He had known both were possible. "Where would he go?" Edith asked. Harper's voice lowered further. "If I were a man with a boy the state wanted," he said, "I'd go where papers don't matter, where names change, where the state can't easily walk in and claim property." "Where?" Edith demanded. Harper hesitated, then spoke a word that made Edith's skin go cold with understanding. "North," he said. "Across the river, into Washington Territory towns where no one asks too much if you work hard and keep quiet." Edith's pulse hammered. "But you said the boy isn't here now," she said. Harper's gaze held hers. "He's not," Harper said, "because something happened." Edith felt dread rise in her throat. "What happened?" she demanded. Harper looked away, then back, his face hard. "The boy left," Harper said. "In the night, before the storm, before the suits came again." Edith's stomach tightened. "Left how? With Caldwell?" Harper shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "Alone." Edith stared at him. "A child. Alone." Harper's voice was flat. "We searched," he said. "We found footprints on the path that went down toward the beach. Small prints, barefoot." Edith pictured wet sand, cold foam, a child's feet. "There were no prints coming back," Harper said. Edith's stomach turned violently. "He went into the sea," she whispered. Harper's jaw tightened. "That's what we told ourselves," he said, "because the other possibility was worse." Edith swallowed. "What other possibility?" Harper's eyes narrowed. "That he didn't go into the sea," he said. "That he went where we didn't see. That he knew how to vanish." Edith's skin prickled. Light horror, but rooted in human fear. Exactly the kind of dread the old stories carried. Edith forced herself to ask the question that had been growing in her like a thorn. "Did you ever speak to him?" she asked. Harper hesitated, then nodded once. Once, he said. The woman was asleep in the station room. Caldwell was up at the light. The boy was sitting on the steps outside, like he owned them. Harper's mouth tightened at the memory. I asked him his name, he said. Edith leaned in, barely breathing. Harper's eyes fixed on the wall behind Edith, as if the scene played there. He looked at me, Harper said, and he said, "You already know it. You read it on paper." Edith felt her throat go tight. "What did you say?" she whispered. Harper's voice dropped to something close to shame. I said, "Samuel." "And?" Edith pressed. Harper swallowed. "He smiled," he said, and he said, "That's not what I was called the first time." Edith's blood seemed to cool. "The first time," she repeated. Harper nodded once. Edith felt the system close around her mind. Institutions, transfers, files, initials. How many times had the boy been renamed? How many times had he been moved? How many times had adults decided what he was, without ever asking who he was? Edith reached into her satchel and pulled out the confidential memorandum from Astoria, keeping it angled away. "Harper," she said, voice tight, "does this mean anything to you?" She showed him the penciled line. "He repeats what you're about to say. Not always, only when he wants to." Harper's face went paler. "That's true," he said. "He did that." Edith's pulse hammered. "Then it's not coincidence," she whispered. Harper's eyes held hers. "No," he said. "It's performance." The word hit Edith hard. It was the first rational framing that didn't require ghosts. A child could learn to terrify adults by appearing to know what he shouldn't. He could listen for cues. He could mirror. He could anticipate. But the phrase about the sea will come early, still scraped at Edith's mind. "Where did he learn it?" she asked. Harper shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "But I know he liked to watch grown men lose their nerve." Edith felt a chill. Not supernatural, psychological. A boy shaped by cages learning to hold power the only way he could. She forced herself back to the practical. "You said Caldwell may have staged his death," she said. "If so, he left something, a tin, a photograph, a letter. He wanted me to find you." Harper frowned. "Why you?" he asked. Edith's mouth tightened. "Because I preserve records," she said. "Because I make paper live." Harper's face hardened with a kind of grim respect. "Then make this live," he said. "Because they will bury it if you don't." Edith stared at the report again. The note about unlawful removal. "Who are they?" she asked. Harper's jaw clenched. "Men who believe they can improve the world by cutting pieces off it," he said. "They don't like witnesses." Edith's mind flashed to the note slipped under her door. "Continue, and you will be included in the record. A record could be made to swallow you whole." Outside the station office, boots sounded on the wooden floor. Harper stiffened. He stood quickly and opened the door a crack, looking out. Then he closed it again. His voice dropped. "They're here," he said. Edith's blood went cold. "Who?" Harper's eyes locked on hers. "Suits," he said. "2 of them, and a deputy." Edith's heart pounded. "How do they know I'm here?" Harper's jaw clenched. "Because they know everything that moves," he said. "And because you came in daylight." Edith's fingers closed around her satchel strap until her knuckles ached. Harper moved to a cabinet and pulled out a heavy coat. "Put this on," he said. Edith stared. "Why?" Harper shoved the coat at her. "Because you're leaving through the back," he said. "Now." Edith slipped into it. It smelled of salt and smoke. The sleeves were too long. Harper opened the back door and gestured toward a narrow path behind the station that led into the trees. "Go uphill," he said, "to the light. If Caldwell staged his death, he'll have left something there you haven't found yet. And the suits won't climb in this rain if they think they've got you cornered down here. Edith's breath came fast. "What about you?" she asked. Harper's mouth tightened. "I'll keep them talking," he said. "And Miss Hart," Edith paused. Harper's eyes were hard. "Don't go to Fairview," he said. "Not yet. Fairview is a mouth. Once it knows your name, it will swallow you." Edith nodded once, then slipped into the trees. The forest behind the station was thick and wet. Branches scraped her coat. The ground was slick with needles. She climbed, lungs burning, hearing voices faintly behind her. Men speaking politely, as if politeness could disguise cages. The path toward Cape Disappointment Light was familiar to keepers and surfmen, but Edith had never walked it. The trees opened occasionally to reveal flashes of gray ocean far below, restless and cold. As she climbed, she could not stop thinking about the boy. If he daytime. The station buildings sat nearby, quiet, their roofs wet with rain. Edith approached the keeper's quarters cautiously, expecting someone to step out and challenge her. No one did. The place felt abandoned in a way that was too clean. Not ruin, not neglect, absence. She tried the door. Locked. She circled the building and found a small window with a cracked pane, taped from the inside. The tape had been applied recently. Someone had been here after the storm. Edith's heart hammered. She moved to the back stair where the tin had been hidden. The sand had been disturbed. Fresh footprints had trampled the grasses. She crouched and brushed aside damp sand. The hiding place was empty. Edith's blood went cold. Someone had returned to where Henry Caldwell had hidden his proof. But, Edith realized, Henry had already sent the tin to her. So what had they been searching for? Unless Caldwell had hidden more. Edith's mind raced, scanning the scene like an archivist scanning a shelf for a missing label. She remembered the lantern room, the oil room, the headkeeper's report. The lantern room unlocked, the oil room door ajar. A hiding place. Edith moved toward the service building attached to the tower. The door was latched but not locked. She eased it open and stepped into a space that smelled faintly of kerosene and damp stone. Inside, shelves lined the walls. Tools hung neatly. The room looked disturbed in a small way. A rag on the floor, a lantern not placed straight, a drawer slightly open. Edith crossed to the drawer and pulled it open. Inside lay a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her breath caught. She unwrapped it carefully. A notebook, thin, worn, stained with salt, and beneath it, a second photograph. Edith's hands trembled as she lifted the photograph toward the weak light. It showed Henry Caldwell, not posed, not smiling, standing beside the same woman from the first photograph, her hand on his arm, his expression tense. And between them, the boy. But not embraced this time. He stood slightly forward as if the adults had arranged themselves around him without realizing it. Edith's stomach tightened at his face. In this photograph, his expression was different. Not merely watchful, but pleased. On the back in pencil, 4 words. "He knows what we did." Edith felt her blood turn to ice. What did we do? And who was we? As she stared, a sound came from outside, a muffled footstep on wet grass, then another, approaching the building. Edith's pulse hammered. She slipped the photograph and notebook into her satchel. Wrapped quickly, hands clumsy with fear. The doorknob turned. Edith stepped back into shadow. Revolver in her hand now, pointed low. The door opened. A man entered, shaking rain from his hat. Not a surfman, not a keeper. A suit. Dark coat, clean collar, careful movements. He paused as if sensing the room. Then he spoke into the dim, his voice calm and certain. "Miss Hart," he said, We can do this quietly. Edith's breath caught. The man stepped further in, and the light fell on his face. Edith recognized him. Not from the hospital, from the courthouse, from the dock, from the rain. The Watcher. He smiled faintly, as if pleased by the completeness of the circle. "You should have returned it," he said softly. "Now you've found the second piece." Edith's fingers tightened on the revolver. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man's eyes flicked to a satchel. "I am the Record," he said. Outside, the wind rose, pushing against the walls. Somewhere above, in the tower, something metallic shifted with a hollow clank, like a bell struck underwater. The man took one step closer, and Edith understood, with sudden clarity, that the most terrifying thing in America was not a haunted lighthouse. It was a system that learned your name, and then decided you were evidence.